Let's begin with a truth that makes most people squirm. The average person has absolutely no comprehension of how many individuals actually possess a net worth of $500,000. Ask 10 different people and you'll receive 10 wildly different answers, each delivered with unearned certainty. Some will insist it's virtually nobody, a rare achievement reserved for the elite. Others will claim it's nearly half the population, treating it as mundane as owning a smartphone. Both camps are spectacularly wrong, but their misplaced confidence reveals something far more troubling than simple ignorance. It exposes how readily we substitute emotion for evidence, how eagerly we accept comfortable fantasies over uncomfortable facts. $500,000 occupies a peculiar space in our collective consciousness. The human mind, magnificent in many ways, utterly fails when asked to process large numbers with any real precision. We evolved to distinguish between 3 berries and 5 berries, not between $300,000 and $500,000. This cognitive limitation creates a strange paradox. The number sounds impossibly large when you first encounter it, triggering that primal awe we reserve for things beyond our immediate grasp. Yet simultaneously, we've been exposed to this figure so relentlessly through media, conversations, and financial advice columns that it shed its power to shock. We've grown numb to it through repetition while still maintaining a mystical reverence for what it represents. This contradiction breeds confusion, and confusion is precisely where catastrophic financial thinking takes root and flourishes. The real danger lurking here isn't the statistical misunderstanding itself. Anyone can be forgiven for not knowing precise percentages off the top of their head. The genuine threat lies in fundamentally misinterpreting what that statistic actually represents in the real world. When people hear $500,000 in net worth, their minds instantly conjure a vivid mental picture. They imagine someone who has decisively won the money game, crossed some invisible finish line into permanent comfort. They envision a person lounging in security, wrapped in safety, blessed with freedom from financial anxiety. They picture wealth that grows silently in the background while its owner sleeps peacefully, compounding effortlessly like some magical financial organism. This mental image, seductive as it is, bears almost no resemblance to reality in most cases. If you construct your financial expectations on this flawed foundation, you're not just setting yourself up for mild disappointment. You're engineering your own financial disillusionment. The investors I've studied and admired throughout my life share one unmistakable trait: an almost religious devotion to objective reality. They don't care what sounds impressive at cocktail parties or what earns applause in casual conversation. They care exclusively about what functions in the real world, what survives contact with market forces, what produces actual results. Poor thinkers approach a number and immediately ask whether it's big or small, impressive or mediocre. Sophisticated thinkers take a fundamentally different approach. They ask what that number actually accomplishes, what power it holds, what doors it opens or keeps locked. This distinction separates those who build lasting wealth from those who merely accumulate impressive-sounding figures. Before we venture any further into this analysis, we need to burn away the fog that obscures clear thinking about net worth. A net worth figure is not, despite popular belief, a measure of someone's intelligence. It doesn't reflect discipline, wisdom, or financial acumen. It certainly doesn't indicate financial power or independence. It's simply a bookkeeping result, nothing more profound than basic subtraction. When someone casually mentions that a person is worth $500,000, what they're actually describing is this: if that individual sold absolutely everything they own, liquidated every asset down to the last possession, and then paid off every single debt they owe, that's the amount remaining. Think carefully about that sentence and what it reveals about the fundamental limitations of this metric. You don't actually live your life this way. You don't wake up each morning, sell everything you own, pay off all your debts, and then use whatever's left to cover that day's expenses. The thought itself is absurd. Yet people routinely treat net worth as if it reflects their day-to-day financial strength, as if this theoretical liquidation value tells them something meaningful about their actual purchasing power and financial flexibility. It's analogous to judging a business solely by what you could get for it in a fire sale while completely ignoring whether it generates consistent cash flow, whether it has pricing power, whether it compounds earnings efficiently. No serious investor would commit such an elementary error when analyzing a company. Yet individuals inflict this exact form of fuzzy thinking on themselves constantly, almost reflexively. The way people carelessly toss around percentages introduces another layer of distortion. When you hear that a substantial share of households have reached this $500,000 milestone, it sounds almost trivial, as if nearly everyone eventually stumbles across this threshold. It's neither trivial nor mystical. The reason opinions scatter so wildly across the spectrum is embarrassingly simple. Most people never bother defining the unit they're actually measuring. A household is emphatically not the same as a person. A household might encompass two adults who have both been working steadily for 4 decades. It might include multiple wage earners under one roof. It might represent assets accumulated over an entire human lifetime, through multiple careers, inherited windfalls, geographic relocations, bull markets, and lucky breaks. When you blend all these variables together under one umbrella term, naturally the resulting number looks larger than it feels when you examine individual circumstances. This isn't statistical manipulation or deliberate deception. It's simply mathematics, and mathematics operates with cold indifference to how any particular number makes you feel emotionally. The illusion deepens considerably when we examine what people actually imagine when they hear $500,000 net worth. They picture liquidity. They envision money that can move swiftly and freely, deployed at will toward opportunities or emergencies. They imagine flexibility, optionality, purchasing power. But the net worth calculation tells you precisely none of these things. It doesn't reveal where the money actually sits. It doesn't indicate how rapidly it grows or whether it grows at all. It certainly doesn't tell you how useful that wealth is in your actual life. These distinctions matter exponentially more than the headline figure that gets all the attention. I've spent decades watching people systematically confuse appearance with underlying reality. They do it in business negotiations. They do it when evaluating investment opportunities. They do it relentlessly, almost compulsively, in their personal finances. A number that appears impressive on paper can still be structurally fragile, built on sand rather than bedrock. A balance sheet that looks robust at first glance can still generate mediocre returns or worse. The same principle applies ruthlessly to individuals. Someone can reach $500,000 in theoretical net worth while remaining financially fragile, vulnerable to any significant disruption. Meanwhile, another person might have far less on paper but possess vastly more control over their financial destiny, more true freedom to make choices without economic coercion. If this sounds counterintuitive, that's encouraging. It means you're actually paying attention rather than nodding along with comfortable conventional wisdom. One of the profound mistakes people make is treating wealth as a destination, a place you arrive at and then relax. Wealth isn't a destination at all. It's a system, a machine, an engine that continues running. Systems are defined by their structure, their internal mechanics, their capacity to generate results consistently. Labels and numbers are just decoration. In what follows, we'll examine the actual distribution behind this number, who reaches it and who doesn't, why the magic word household completely transforms the story. But before we move forward, internalize this principle. If you don't truly understand what a number measures, what it includes and what it deliberately excludes, you have absolutely no business allowing that number to guide your decisions. And $500,000 in net worth stands as one of the most chronically misunderstood figures in modern personal finance. Not because the amount itself is small or large, but because people consistently mistake the symbol for the substance it supposedly represents. Let's ground this discussion in actual data rather than speculation. According to information compiled from Smart Asset and the Federal Reserve, roughly 29% of United States households possess a net worth of $500,000 or more. When people encounter this figure for the first time, they typically react in one of two predictable ways. Some are genuinely shocked, finding the percentage far higher than they expected. Others are immediately suspicious, doubting the methodology or questioning the definitions. Both reactions, understandable as they might be, completely miss the crucial point. The raw number isn't where the problem lives. The problem emerges from failing to ask an absolutely basic question. What precisely constitutes a household in this calculation? In finance, sloppy definitions are extraordinarily dangerous. They inevitably lead to sloppy conclusions, and sloppy conclusions have a nasty habit of costing real money. A household is not an individual person. It's an accounting container, a statistical unit that can encompass wildly different situations. It might include two adults who have both been working steadily for 40 years, combining dual incomes, shared housing expenses, joint retirement accounts, accumulated home equity from decades of mortgage payments. If you merge two average careers over a sufficiently long time horizon, reaching $500,000 in combined net worth isn't remotely shocking. In fact, it would be genuinely surprising if it didn't happen with reasonable frequency. But most people don't process information this way. They hear 29% of households, and their brain subconsciously translates it into almost a third of people are doing really well financially. That mental translation is fundamentally wrong. When you change the unit of measurement from households to individuals, the picture transforms immediately and dramatically. On an individual basis, the percentage plummets to approximately 15%. Suddenly, the milestone starts appearing very different. It's no longer something that nearly everyone eventually reaches. It becomes something that a distinct minority achieves, and that realization should reshape your entire mental model. Changing the unit of analysis changes the conclusion. This is elementary logic, yet it's astonishing how often intelligent people ignore it completely. I've watched investors make catastrophic mistakes involving millions of dollars because they failed to properly define what they were actually measuring. Personal finance operates under identical principles. Another distortion people rarely notice or consider. The data includes retirees, individuals who are 65, 70, even 80 years old, people who have spent entire lifetimes accumulating assets slowly and steadily. If you exclude retirees from the calculation, the percentage drops again significantly. If you narrow your focus to younger age brackets, it drops even further. So when a 30-year-old person compares themselves to a statistic that includes people with 50 years of accumulation behind them, they're engaging in a subtle but damaging form of self-deception. This kind of inappropriate comparison doesn't motivate positive behavior. It confuses and distorts expectations, and confusion inevitably leads to poor decisions. There's another factor worth examining: survivorship bias. Households that dissolve through divorce, catastrophic illness, spectacularly bad decisions, or plain terrible luck don't appear neatly in these statistics. They've been filtered out, removed from the data set. The people who remain in the sample long enough to be counted and measured tend to be those who successfully avoided catastrophic mistakes. This doesn't make them financial geniuses. It simply makes them non-disasters. Avoiding stupidity, as it turns out, is far more powerful than chasing brilliance. This principle applies universally, including to net worth statistics. Now let's confront another uncomfortable truth that challenges popular narratives. A large share of those households didn't reach $500,000 through extraordinary investing skill, brilliant market timing, or sophisticated financial strategies. They reached it through time, inflation, and real estate appreciation. They bought homes decades ago when prices were dramatically lower. They paid down mortgages slowly and methodically. Asset prices rose steadily over time, pushed upward by inflation and population growth. That's not clever financial maneuvering. That's structural participation in a rising market. The system rewarded showing up and staying in the game, not demonstrating brilliance. This matters enormously because it means the statistic reveals very little about financial competence or skill. It mostly reflects age, years spent in the workforce, exposure to rising asset prices over long periods. None of these factors guarantee future success or indicate transferable skills. Think about this through a simple analogy. If two people each flip a fair coin 1,000 times, one of them will inevitably end up with better results than the other purely through random chance. That doesn't mean you should study and copy their coin-flipping strategy. Net worth statistics function similarly. They tell you where people ended up, what their final position looks like, but they reveal almost nothing about how skillfully they navigated the journey or whether their approach can be replicated. This is where we can apply one of Charlie Munger's favorite mental tools: inversion. Instead of asking, "How did these households manage to reach $500,000?" try inverting the question. How could someone reach $500,000 in net worth and still be financially weak? That inverted question leads you toward much more useful answers and deeper understanding. Because once you examine situations closely, you quickly realize that reaching this threshold is absolutely not the same as achieving financial independence. It's not the same as having real control over your life. It's certainly not the same as possessing meaningful optionality. Most households that crossed this threshold did so slowly, passively, almost accidentally, without any coherent strategy or intentional design. That's not a criticism or judgment. It's simply observable reality. But if you mistake that reality for evidence of financial strength, you're committing a serious analytical error that will cost you. In what follows, we're going to systematically dismantle the biggest source of this error: the fundamental misunderstanding of what net worth actually measures and what it very deliberately ignores. Once you see this clearly, the $500,000 figure will stop feeling impressive and start feeling incomplete, like a sentence missing its most important words. We need to examine the most abused concept in personal finance: net worth itself. People treat it as a scoreboard, a definitive verdict on their intelligence, discipline, and overall success in life. That's complete nonsense. Net worth is not a measure of financial strength or capability. It's merely a snapshot taken with one very specific lens, and that lens deliberately excludes almost everything that actually matters in real-world financial situations. Let's strip this concept down to its most basic elements. Net worth is calculated by taking everything you own and subtracting everything you owe. That's the entire formula. No nuance, no context, no qualitative judgment. It doesn't ask how your assets actually behave over time. It doesn't inquire when you can access them or under what conditions. It doesn't consider whether they improve your life or restrict your options. This is why intelligent, educated people can have impressively high net worths while simultaneously making terrible financial decisions. They confuse a static number on paper with a dynamic system that operates in the real world. In business analysis, we would never commit this error. No rational investor would evaluate a company solely by calculating what you could get if you liquidated all its assets tomorrow. You'd demand to know, does this business generate consistent cash flow? Does it reinvest capital at high rates of return? Does it maintain flexibility under stress? Can it adapt to changing circumstances? Yet individuals happily ignore these exact questions about their own financial situations. They see a large number on their net worth statement and relax, assuming everything is fine. That's profoundly dangerous thinking. Here's the critical flaw that undermines the entire concept. Net worth does not measure liquidity. Liquidity is what allows you to respond effectively to reality as it unfolds. It's what lets you handle genuine emergencies without panic. It's what enables you to seize unexpected opportunities when they appear. It's what lets you sleep soundly at night knowing you can handle whatever comes. A dollar you cannot access might as well not exist for immediate purposes. It's not the same as a dollar you can deploy freely. Yet the net worth calculation treats them as completely identical. That alone should trigger deep suspicion about relying too heavily on this metric. Consider this straightforward thought experiment. Suppose someone owns a home worth $800,000 with a $400,000 mortgage outstanding and almost nothing else in assets. On paper, that represents a $400,000 net worth. Looks decent, right? But if they lose their job tomorrow morning, that impressive number won't pay next month's mortgage payment. It won't buy groceries for their family. It won't solve the immediate problem they're facing. The asset exists, certainly, but the usefulness does not. That's what I mean when I insist that net worth is merely a bookkeeping result. It tells you what would theoretically remain after a complete liquidation, a scenario that almost never occurs in real life and would be deeply disruptive and costly if it actually happened. Another crucial missing dimension is cash flow. Net worth doesn't care whether your assets produce income. It doesn't distinguish between assets that compound and grow versus assets that sit dormant or even decay over time. A dollar that produces additional dollars through dividends, interest, or business profits is fundamentally, categorically different from a dollar that sits motionless. But net worth counts them identically. This is precisely how people end up feeling wealthy while being financially constrained in their actual daily lives. They possess assets but lack leverage in any intelligent sense. They have theoretical value but no practical motion, no engine generating forward momentum. I've maintained for years that the optimal financial position is one that provides you with genuine options, real choices. Optionality emerges from flexibility, not from impressive-looking balance sheets. A large illiquid asset can actually reduce your optionality just as easily as it can increase it, depending entirely on your specific circumstances and needs. Now let's examine the psychology, because that's where most people become truly trapped. When someone crosses a round number milestone, 100,000, 500,000, 1 million, the brain desperately wants to declare victory. It feels like meaningful progress has been completed, like you've reached some kind of finish line. But milestones are not endpoints. They're merely checkpoints along a much longer journey. If you stop thinking strategically at the checkpoint, you'll miss the road that stretches ahead, including all its curves and obstacles. The reason $500,000 is especially deceptive is that it sits precisely at the intersection of two competing narratives. One narrative insists this amount is enormous, more money than most people will ever see. The other narrative claims it's perfectly normal, something any disciplined person should achieve. Both narratives are false when taken in isolation. What actually matters is composition, the internal structure of how that wealth is arranged. How much of that net worth can actually move when you need it? How much compounds and grows automatically? How much creates genuine resilience against life's inevitable shocks? If you can't answer those questions with specificity, the headline number is essentially irrelevant. This is why I've always strongly preferred thinking in terms of systems rather than static snapshots. A robust financial system possesses durable cash flow that arrives regularly. It contains assets that reinvest capital efficiently. It minimizes fragility and concentration risk. It maintains a meaningful margin of safety. A weak financial system, by contrast, features heavy concentration in illiquid assets. It depends entirely on continued employment income. It offers little room for error or adaptation. Both systems can display the identical net worth on paper. That's not a paradox. That's a clear warning signal. Another critical point people rarely consider is the dimension of time. Net worth doesn't tell you when your money becomes useful or accessible. Retirement accounts may show substantial value, but access is delayed by years or decades and penalized if accessed early. Home equity may be considerable, but extraction is expensive and slow. Personal property like vehicles or jewelry may inflate the number on your statement, but provide zero financial leverage. Time matters enormously. A dollar available today is fundamentally different from a dollar locked away for 30 years. But net worth calculations ignore this entirely, treating all dollars as equivalent regardless of accessibility. So when someone casually mentions, "I have a $500,000 net worth," the only intelligent response is, "Interesting. Now tell me exactly how it's structured." Without that crucial follow-up conversation, you're discussing shadows on the wall, not the actual objects casting them. In what comes next, we're going to examine the largest and most profoundly misunderstood component hiding inside that $500,000 figure: the primary residence. Once you understand how home equity actually behaves in the real world, you'll see clearly why so many people feel subjectively rich while remaining objectively stuck in their financial circumstances. That's not an accident or bad luck. It's a direct consequence of confusing ownership with productivity. Now we arrive at the absolute centerpiece of the illusion, the element that makes everything else possible: the house. For the vast majority of people who reach a $500,000 net worth, the home is not simply part of the calculation. It is the calculation. This is where perception completely divorces itself from reality, where feelings and facts occupy entirely different universes. Culturally, owning a valuable home is treated as irrefutable proof of success and achievement. It looks impressive to neighbors and visitors. It feels permanent and solid in a way that stock portfolios don't. It provides constant daily reinforcement through tangible benefits: pleasant neighborhood, quality schools, updated kitchen, comfortable spaces. That feeling is powerful and seductive. But feelings are not financial analysis, no matter how strong they might be. From a rigorous analytical perspective, the first question you should always ask about any asset is brutally simple: what does it actually do? Not what does it symbolize in your mind. Not how does it make you feel emotionally. What does it produce in measurable terms? A primary residence produces shelter. That's genuinely valuable. Shelter is a fundamental human need. But shelter is consumption, not compounding wealth creation. This is where people make a critical category error with massive long-term consequences. They treat their home as if it were a high-quality investment asset generating returns, when in reality it behaves more like a forced savings account combined with a lifestyle choice. That doesn't make it bad or wrong. It simply makes it different, and failing to recognize the difference is costly. Historically, residential real estate appreciates at roughly 3 to 4% annually over extended periods. That's not terrible performance, but it's hardly extraordinary either. More importantly, the return on your invested equity declines steadily over time. Early in a mortgage, small price increases can create impressive percentage gains on the relatively small amount of equity you've invested. That feels exciting and makes you feel smart. But as equity builds year after year, each additional dollar of appreciation gets spread across a much larger base. The asset grows heavier and more cumbersome. The returns grow thinner and less impressive. This is elementary arithmetic, yet almost nobody thinks about it this way. Equity behaves like air filling a balloon. It accumulates steadily, expanding the balloon's volume, but it doesn't multiply itself. Stocks and business ownership, by contrast, are explicitly designed to reinvest profits and compound exponentially. They don't just inflate gradually. They replicate and multiply. This distinction explains why two people can both claim $500,000 in net worth yet live in entirely different financial realities. The homeowner checks Zillow regularly and sees a rising estimate, which generates feelings of increasing wealth. But the underlying financial engine hasn't changed at all. The house still doesn't generate cash flow. It still can't be partially sold to access some value while retaining the rest. Accessing the equity typically requires either taking on debt or relocating entirely. That's not flexibility. That's constraint dressed up as wealth. Another issue people rarely contemplate is concentration risk. For many households, the primary residence represents 50 to 70% of total net worth. In numerous cases, even more. No rational investor would voluntarily concentrate that much capital into a single illiquid, non-diversified, geographically bound asset. It violates every basic principle of prudent risk management. Yet people do it willingly, even eagerly, because it doesn't feel like investing. It feels like living, like making a home. The psychology completely masks the underlying structure and its inherent risks. Now let's address the persistent myth that home equity represents safety. It's stable, certainly, but stable does not mean productive or powerful. A house ties your accumulated wealth to one specific geographic location, one local economy, one metro area's job market, one asset class. That's an enormous amount of dependence for something that produces zero income. When local markets stagnate or worse, decline significantly, that equity stops moving entirely. It just sits there, frozen. At that point, the illusion becomes painfully visible. People discover that their impressive net worth number doesn't help them change careers, relocate for better opportunities, retire early, or take calculated risks. It just exists, inert and unusable. This is why I've insisted for years that the right question is never, is this asset valuable? The right question is always, is this asset useful? Usefulness emerges from optionality. Optionality emerges from liquidity, diversification, and capacity for reinvestment. Home equity scores poorly on all three dimensions. Yet it dominates the net worth conversation completely, distorting people's understanding of their true financial position. That's why the $500,000 milestone is so profoundly misleading. People think they've crossed into a new financial category, achieved some kind of elevated status. In reality, they've simply experienced a revaluation of the place where they sleep. The house got more expensive in dollar terms, but their fundamental financial situation hasn't transformed. There's one more subtle point worth emphasizing. As people age, home equity tends to grow steadily while financial flexibility often shrinks simultaneously. The asset expands while the freedom contracts. This creates a dangerous psychological trap. People feel richer, more secure, more successful at precisely the moment when they should be thinking more carefully and critically about cash flow, access to capital, and resilience against shocks. They relax their thinking when they should be intensifying their planning. That's not stupidity. It's completely natural human psychology. But understanding this tendency gives you a decisive edge. None of this analysis means owning a home is a mistake. Home ownership can be entirely sensible for many people. What I'm saying is that confusing a home with a wealth-building engine is a catastrophic mistake. The house can support your life effectively. It can reduce expenses later in retirement. It can provide stability and community. But it will not, by itself, carry you to financial independence. Once you see that distinction clearly, the $500,000 net worth number starts losing its mystique and power over your imagination. In the next section, we'll make this difference painfully, undeniably clear by comparing two people with identical net worths but radically different financial futures. That's where the underlying structure finally reveals itself completely. This is where the comfortable illusion finally collapses entirely. Because once you compare structures rather than headline numbers, the $500,000 milestone stops looking like any kind of finish line and starts looking like a fork in the road, where two paths diverge dramatically. Let's examine two people carefully. On paper, looking at their net worth statements, they appear identical. Each possesses exactly $500,000 in net worth. Same number, same headline figure, same bragging rights at social gatherings. But financially, they inhabit completely different universes with entirely different futures ahead of them. Person 1 owns a home currently valued at $750,000. They have $300,000 in accumulated equity and a mortgage covering the remainder. The remaining $200,000 is scattered across retirement accounts, some emergency cash reserves, and a decent car. Person 2 rents their residence. They have the full $500,000 invested across a diversified portfolio of productive businesses through stock market ownership. If you stop your analysis here, you've already failed completely. The intelligent question is never, who is richer on paper? The intelligent question is, who has constructed the stronger system for generating future wealth? Person 2 possesses something person 1 fundamentally lacks. A machine, an engine that operates continuously. Their capital works every single day. Markets are open. Companies are operating. Profits are being reinvested. The system compounds and scales without requiring additional effort from them. Person 1, by contrast, owns something valuable but completely inert. The house will likely appreciate slowly over decades, following historical patterns. But it will not suddenly double in value without extraordinary circumstances. It will not reinvest its own earnings. It will not throw off quarterly cash flow. It will simply sit there and continue being a house, providing shelter but not growth. Now let's talk about trajectory, about where these two paths lead over time. If person 2 earns average long-term market returns of roughly 10% annually, their $500,000 can realistically grow to $1 million in under a decade. No genius required, no special insights, just time and consistent discipline. Person 1 does not have that glide path at all. Their equity grows linearly, not exponentially. Each year adds incremental value, but the rate of return declines as the equity base expands. That's an absolutely crucial distinction. Compounding creates acceleration, momentum building on momentum. Appreciation creates accumulation, slow, steady growth. They feel somewhat similar in the early years. They are not similar at all over extended time periods. This is why people vastly overestimate how close they are to reaching the next milestone. They see their current number and assume momentum will carry them forward automatically. But momentum only exists when the underlying assets are specifically designed to multiply themselves. Locked equity does not multiply. Deferred retirement assets do not multiply quickly. Lifestyle assets do not multiply at all. They accumulate gradually, and accumulation without compounding is painfully slow. Here's another critical difference. Person 2 has flexibility, real optionality. They can rebalance their portfolio. They can reduce risk exposure. They can generate income. They can change geography without major financial disruption. They can take advantage of unexpected opportunities. Person 1 has constraints everywhere. Most of their wealth is permanently tied to a specific location, a particular lifestyle, a fixed asset. Accessing that wealth requires either selling the home entirely or borrowing against it. Neither option is free or simple. This is not a moral judgment about life choices. It's a structural observation about financial reality. Financial independence is not fundamentally about how much you own. It's about how easily you can change direction when circumstances require it. Now let's address the emotional objection that inevitably arises. People will protest, but the homeowner has security. Yes, absolutely, they have housing security. That matters and has real value. But housing security is categorically not the same as financial independence. You cannot pay for healthcare, education, unexpected opportunities, or life emergencies with a renovated kitchen. Security and optionality are related but distinctly different concepts. Another mistake people consistently make is assuming that real estate returns are somehow comparable to equity market returns over time. They demonstrably are not. Real estate is slow, capital-intensive, geographically constrained, and illiquid. It can be excellent in specific contexts with particular strategies. But as a default wealth engine for building financial independence, it fundamentally lacks scalability. Stocks, for all their volatility and psychological discomfort, are explicitly built for growth. They represent fractional ownership in productive enterprises that reinvest capital into expansion. That's the entire game. Ownership in productive, compounding assets beats ownership of static, appreciating ones over sufficiently long periods. This is not ideology or opinion. It's arithmetic, mathematics, observable reality. Yet people continue to equate net worth with financial strength, treating them as synonymous. That's precisely why so many households reach $500,000 and then completely stall. They feel like they've arrived at their destination. In reality, they've simply accumulated value. There's a world of difference between those two states. There's a final irony worth noting. The homeowner typically feels substantially richer than the investor. They see tangible upgrades around them. They receive social validation from visitors. They get constant reminders of their property's value. The investor sees numbers fluctuating on a screen, abstract and intangible. One feels real and solid. The other is actually real in terms of financial power. Over time, reality wins decisively. In this final section, we'll tie everything together and return to the core lesson underlying all of this analysis. Why the $500,000 milestone is useful but dangerous, and why the composition of your wealth matters infinitely more than the total number written on your net worth statement. Now we can finally put this entire question to rest. The $500,000 net worth milestone is not meaningless or irrelevant, but it is deeply, profoundly misunderstood by most people who discuss it. Misunderstanding numbers is one of the fastest, most reliable ways to make catastrophically bad decisions that compound over time. The analytical approach has always been brutally simple and unforgiving. Ignore the headline, study the structure beneath it. Net worth is purely a headline number. It tells you almost nothing meaningful about resilience under stress, flexibility when circumstances change, future growth potential, or margin of safety against unexpected shocks. Those qualities don't appear on a balance sheet snapshot. They reveal themselves only through behavior observed over extended time periods. If there is one mental model you should carry away from this entire analysis, it's this. Wealth is not a number you calculate once per year. Wealth is a system that continues working productively without your constant attention and effort. That system possesses several non-negotiable traits that you must understand. First, it compounds relentlessly. Assets that merely appreciate in dollar terms make you feel better emotionally. Assets that compound exponentially change your entire trajectory and future. Second, it maintains sufficient liquidity to adapt when circumstances shift. You don't need everything liquid immediately, but you need meaningful flexibility. A system that only functions if nothing ever goes wrong is not a good system. It's an accident waiting to happen. Third, it actively avoids fragility through diversification. Concentration feels safe and simple until suddenly it isn't. True safety emerges from not being dependent on any single outcome, any single asset, any single scenario playing out perfectly. This is why so many people reach $500,000 and then mysteriously slow down or stall completely. They mistake a checkpoint for a destination. They see a large impressive number and relax their thinking, reducing their intensity. That's exactly when strategic thinking should become sharper and more focused, not more complacent. Another mistake people make repeatedly is assuming that time alone will automatically fix a weak structure. Time amplifies whatever already exists. If your assets are designed to compound, time becomes your most powerful ally. If they're not, time simply makes the structural weakness more obvious and painful. This is why the widespread belief that reaching $1 million is inevitable after hitting $500,000 is often completely wrong. There is no automatic glide path unless your money is placed inside a system specifically designed to multiply itself. Locked home equity does not multiply. Deferred retirement assets do not multiply quickly enough. Lifestyle assets do not multiply at all. They accumulate slowly, and accumulation without compounding is frustratingly, maddeningly slow. None of this analysis constitutes an argument against home ownership as a life choice. It's an argument against confusion, against fuzzy thinking that mistakes one thing for another. A house can be a perfectly sound decision for many people. It can reduce future expenses significantly. It can provide emotional stability, community roots, a sense of belonging. But it is absolutely not a substitute for productive capital that compounds. People who confuse those two fundamentally different concepts tend to feel wealthy and secure while remaining completely dependent on their labor income. That's not freedom. That's a comfortable cage. Now here's the uncomfortable closing thought you need to internalize. When you learn that roughly 29% of households have a net worth of $500,000 or more, the correct reaction is neither envy nor comfortable satisfaction. The correct reaction is intense curiosity. Curiosity about how much of that impressive number is actually working productively. How much is realistically accessible when needed? How much is compounding automatically? Because only a small fraction of that group has constructed a structure that naturally pushes them toward 1 million and beyond. Only a small fraction has meaningful passive growth occurring. The rest are stable but static, and stability without growth eventually, inevitably becomes stagnation. The final lesson is simultaneously the simplest and the most important, and it applies far beyond money and finance. Never, ever let a number replace actual thinking. Numbers are tools for understanding reality. They are not conclusions. They are not verdicts. If you want real financial strength that endures across decades, stop asking yourself, how much am I worth on paper? Start asking instead, what is my money actually doing when I'm not looking at it? What is it producing? What